Welcome to our deep dive into the Grand Parti de Lyon, a groundbreaking financial innovation that inadvertently sparked the birth of sovereign contagion. Today, we are exploring the anatomy of the 1558 financial crisis and the ultimate collapse of Valois France. Imagine a world where the financial engine of an entire kingdom is suddenly derailed, sending shockwaves across the continent and fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape of early modern Europe. This catastrophic sovereign default was not just a mere failed loan. It was the very first truly international financial crisis of the modern era. We will dissect the mechanisms of this revolutionary debt instrument, the geopolitical shocks that brought it down, and how its failure plunged the French monarchy into decades of bitter religious and civil conflict. The Grand Parti was a prototype for modern public debt that ultimately triggered a continental collapse. The context lies in Henri II's Eighth Italian War, which required continuous capital that severely outstripped traditional feudal tax collection. To fix this, the Crown introduced the Grand Parti in 1555, a revolutionary 10-year institutional loan featuring 41 constant installments. This mechanism was designed to restructure floating debt into a manageable schedule. However, devastating catalysts emerged during 1557. The severe military defeat at St. Quentin, coupled with the Spanish sovereign default, abruptly froze European liquidity. The fallout was catastrophic. The 1558 default destroyed French credit, forced the kingdom into a humiliating geopolitical surrender, and directly ignited the devastating French wars of religion by breaking the state's institutional authority. To understand this crisis, we must examine the financial engine of the 16th century, which relied heavily on the Lyon-Rescontre system. The process involved three steps. First, Italian, German, and Swiss merchant bankers gathered to trade and issue letters of exchange. Second, during the Rescontre, balances were mutually offset at the end of the fair without actually moving physical bullion. Third, only the fractional remaining differences were settled in cash or rolled over. Lyon established the first French stock exchange in 1506, and by the 1550s, the city handled a staggering 81% of the French kingdom's business. This system's primary advantage was its high concentration of liquidity and technical expertise, which allowed international bankers to creatively bypass strict canon usury laws and seamlessly fund vast geopolitical ambitions. The Valois military ambitions were funded by an incredibly unsustainable 3-month rollover cycle. In the first cycle at the Epiphany Fair, the treasury would borrow 10,000 livres via a standard lettre de change. By the Easter Fair, the principal plus an annualized interest of 10 to 16% was due. Lacking cash, the treasury would simply issue a new bill for 10,400 livres, rolling the debt forward to the August Fair. This created a deadly financial spiral. Cumulative interest quickly ballooned, and bankers eventually refused to issue new bills, fearing the principal would never be paid. Henri II's campaigns required massive cash injections for foreign mercenaries and modern fortifications, and the highly decentralized French tax base simply could not keep pace with these escalating costs. Enter the Grand Parti de Lyon of 1555, an operation of stupendous financial modernity designed to fix this broken system. The key architects were Albis del Bene, an Italian banker appointed as superintendent of finances, and Anne de Montmorency, the politically powerful constable of France. Their blueprint schematic targeted a total of 12 million livres tournois. This massive sum consolidated 9 million livres of short-term debt while securing 3 million in new cash. The amortization engine utilized 41 constant quarterly installments over a 10-year period, backed by specific income streams from the Lyon fairs and royal taxes. The key insight here is that this was the first institutionalized public debt prototype restricted to Lyon merchant bankers, successfully bypassing the chaotic short-term rollover system with a predictable, long-term annuity structure. Let us compare the evolution of early modern debt by examining how the Crown restructured the kingdom's liabilities. The traditional dry exchange operated on a short 3-month term from fair to fair, requiring a massive balloon payment at the end. Interest was hidden in exchange rates to avoid usury laws, utilizing ad hoc individual merchants in voluntary contracts. In stark contrast, the Grand Parti established a 10-year term with 41 constant quarterly installments and heterodox legalized interest in Lyon. It relied on an institutional consortium of merchant bankers and coercive forced conversion by the Crown. By successfully transforming floating debt into structured long-term debt, the Crown achieved immediate fiscal relief, but it dangerously tied the entire French banking sector directly to the state's unpredictable military survival and shifting fortunes. Tragically, the twin shocks of 1557 completely severed the crucial liquidity pipelines sustaining the Grand Parti. This crisis involved 3 interconnected nodes. The first node was Genoa, where banking cartels supplied vast capital to both the Spanish and French crowns. The second node was Madrid, representing a massive financial shock. Burdened by his own overwhelming war debt, King Philip II of Spain abruptly suspended his payments, initiating the 1557 Spanish default. The third node was a military shock at St. Quentin in August 1557, where the French army was decimated and Constable Montmorency was captured. This created a deadly contagion effect. Denied their Spanish repayments, Genoese bankers could not meet their obligations in Lyon. The international credit market instantly froze, and the French crown faltered on its quarterly annuity payments. The 1558 default marked the moment the French government transitioned from a sophisticated borrower to a desperate defaulter. Shockingly, only 9% of the total Grand Parti issue was ever repaid according to its original schedule. The fatal event occurred in 1558 when the French treasury unilaterally suspended the 41 installment amortization. The required massive concentration of cash at each Lyon fair had simply become impossible to fulfill. The market reaction was brutal and immediate. A liquidity collapse occurred as the pyramid of credit unraveled instantly. This triggered a devastating cascade of bankruptcies among the wealthy merchant dynasties of Lyon. Ultimately, the cessation of commercial activity destroyed the very tax revenue intended to service the debt, creating a terminal downward spiral that crippled the kingdom's financial stability entirely. This severe sovereign insolvency forced the immediate liquidation of Valois' geopolitical ambition. The culmination of this financial exhaustion was the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis in April 1559. France was forced into bitter concessions, renouncing all historical claims to Milan and officially recognizing Spanish hegemony over Naples and Sicily. It was a humiliating admission of defeat in Italy after decades of costly warfare. However, France did manage some retentions, temporarily holding on to Calais and permanently retaining the three bishoprics of Metz, Toul, and Verdun. Ultimately, neither France nor Spain could financially continue the grueling struggle. The 1558 default effectively redrew the political map of Europe in favor of the Habsburgs for the next century and a half, establishing Spain as the continent's dominant imperial power. Following the peace treaty, the Guise Regency inherited a bankrupt state and immediately implemented punishing austerity. In July 1559, the sudden death of Henri II led to the young François II assuming the throne, allowing the ambitious Guise brothers to assert total control over the administration. Their inheritance was a staggering royal debt of 43 million livres, equating to several years of total royal revenue. To survive, they enacted radical austerity measures. They suppressed royal offices, suspended essential military pensions, and disbanded the heavy cavalry to save 700,000 livres annually. The breaking point arrived when violently discontented soldiers gathered at Fontainebleau to demand their back pay. Threatened with hanging by the Guise administration, the furious soldiers departed the palace primed for armed rebellion against the fragile state. We can see public finance as the hidden engine of total social collapse. The root cause was the 1558 sovereign default and the crushing 43 million livre debt. This failure split into two dangerous branches. The first branch was aristocratic alienation. Cancelled pensions and unpaid military wages marginalized Bourbon princes and Protestant grandees, leading directly to the conspiracy of Amboise in 1560, an attempted coup against the Catholic Guise administration. The second branch was urban radicalization. The severe economic vacuum and cascading merchant bankruptcies in Lyon completely broke traditional Catholic patronage networks. Consequently, Lyon briefly became the radicalized capital of Protestantism between 1562 and 1563. The core insight is that the state's inability to honor its financial commitments destroyed its authority, igniting the bloody French wars of religion. Amidst this chaos, Chancellor Michel de l'Hôpital attempted to rebuild institutional trust, but ultimately failed. He presented the 1560 reform agenda at the Assembly of Notables and the Estates General of Orléans. His ambitious plan proposed suppressing the guild system, liquidating confraternity capital for local schools, and alienating wealthy church lands to actively pay down the 43 million livre debt. However, he faced the harsh reality of the modernity gap. The 1558 default had entirely destroyed the institutional trust required for centralized reform. Furthermore, the Catholic Ultra Party and the Triumvirate successfully blocked these financial reforms to protect their own wealth and religious orthodoxy. The key lesson is that Henri II centralized the demand for credit, but could not centralize the repayment against privileged estates who fiercely resisted taxation. The resulting capital flight permanently shifted European finance and abruptly ended Lyon's golden age. We observe a massive Genoese pivot. Realizing the French fair system was far too vulnerable to sovereign interference and violent urban riots, elite Italian bankers simply abandoned Lyon. This led to the famous flight to Besançon, or Besançon, where they established purely financial clearing fairs under Habsburg protection. These new fairs were entirely devoid of physical merchandise, dealing only in abstract credit. This monumental shift catalyzed the Atlantic Revolution. Fleeing capital heavily favored maritime powers and abstract financial instruments, directly setting the stage for the dramatic rise of Amsterdam and London as global financial hubs. Meanwhile, the once mighty Lyon was permanently reduced to a regional center known primarily for silk manufacturing and printing. Finally, we examine the harvest of adversity and the long shadow cast by the Grand Parti. The 1558 failure inaugurated a devastating cycle of crises, followed by John Law's system collapse in 1720, Thérèse's default in 1770, and the two-thirds bankruptcy in 1797. This created a profound default taboo. Unlike Britain, which successfully created the Bank of England in 1694, France's 1558 failure bred a deep, lasting distrust of institutionalized public debt. Consequently, France was forced to borrow at a massive sovereign risk premium for the next 200 years. Our final takeaway is that the Grand Parti provided the technical blueprint for modern finance, but tragically proved that sophisticated financial instruments absolutely cannot survive without the underlying transparent institutions required to guarantee and protect them from autocratic overreach.
Common Sense Capitalism. See the logic. We'll see you next time.